Ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of the Paleoconnection. And today, of course, we'll be talking about the absolute biggest news. President Trump has been impeached. One of the big reasons for this, of course, is the claim that President Trump has basically started a riot on Capitol Hill. He started the storming of the Capitol. And a more broad claim that basically he has brought our democracy into chaos. Isn't that right, Brandon?
That is right.
The impeachment is saying what? That this is an indictment. Well, not an indictment, but it's a charge of him basically inciting an insurrection?
Yes, the belief is that Trump has incited an insurrection with his speech that he gave shortly before the riots started. Now, I've actually read the transcript of the entire speech. It's quite long. And, you know, there are parts throughout the speech that one would say that there is imagery used, you know, perhaps violent imagery, you know, words like fighting, talking about strength and boxers and things like this. You could perhaps say that some of this imagery was used, but finding a specific part in the speech where he actually incited violence to happen, to me, just doesn't exactly happen. The one part of the speech that is commonly quoted in media sources as to being one of the most direct calls for violence is, let me quote, Trump says, "Republicans are constantly fighting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. It's like a boxer, and we want to be so nice. We want to be so respectful of everybody, including bad people. And we're going to have to fight much harder. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong." End quote. So there is words like strength and fighting in that quote. But the way I read that quote is that Trump is talking more generally about showing strength and showing strength in the protest. He doesn't directly say storm the Capitol, take people hostage, kill people. He doesn't say anything like that. He says to fight, right? And of course, fighting could mean physically fighting, but it could also mean fighting in a more emotional sense, so, like never giving up, or even fighting through, legal means, through the courts or things like that. So I find it really unlikely that he will be impeached based on these words that I've seen. Now, there was other speech that people, considered violent imagery throughout his entire long speech. But like I said, to me, that was the part that seems to possibly be the most egregious, but I think it definitely falls short of the incitement to, was the exact charge, incitement of insurrection. It definitely falls short.
Right. And let's also remember that initially a lot of the phrasing was people were claiming that he was inciting a riot. This is something you heard a lot around January 9th and 10th and just after. But the thing is that while inciting a riot is really a law that exists on the books, there is basically no way that he'd be able to be charged with it. When you look at the U.S. penal codes, specifically 18 U.S. Code Section 2102, they actually provide some phrasing that makes it clear that inciting a riot is only for people who, quote, organize, promote, encourage, participate in, or carry on a riot. Language that encourages people to organize, promote, encourage, participate in, or carry on a riot. And it says specifically that advocacy of ideas or expression of belief not involving advocacy of any acts of violence or assertions of the rightness of or the right to commit acts of violence is protected speech. So basically, no matter how symbolically the president speaks, there would be no way that he could be charged under an incitement to riot. And that's why the famous legal YouTuber named Legal Eagle, he said that it'd be very unlikely, extremely unlikely, that President Trump could be convicted of this before a Supreme Court, because ultimately the courts do protect political speech and are sensitive to it. And this is somebody who's actually quite liberal and normally is very, he goes on in it to be very negative about President Trump.
Yeah, the other thing that will definitely help Trump in this situation is the fact that he did say other things like, quote, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." So within the same speech, we have a very clear quote of Trump saying that he wants people to be peaceful and to make their voice heard. So you could, like I said before, you can say that the rhetoric, the fighting, the strength, that he was referring to, the protests. So he wanted them to go over there and to fight, as in the way that you would fight in a protest. Or, like I said, you could even consider fighting perhaps through legal means or things like that. So that other quote being in the same speech that he just gave, I don't see how you can take one part of the speech and say it was an incitement to insurrection, and then the other part of the speech and just totally disregard it. So, of course, he might have been sending mixed signals. Who knows what actually he was trying to do? Maybe he, was smart enough to make sure that he did say this, and that he wanted people to be peaceful. And maybe he was trying to incite violence. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is that I don't see anything in here, like you said, that the legal expert, Legal Eagle, agrees that shows that he will be properly impeached.
Right. And it's all speculation as to whether or not he thought he could inspire violence that would change the outcome of the vote and everything else. And if this was honestly a plot, this was the most retarded plot you could ever conceive. You have a mob of basically unarmed people. They always point out that there is some truck that was picked up later where some freak had a bunch of explosives and arms inside of it. But as if these guys are going to, the mob is going to go back, this guy's going to open up his truck, and they're all going to come out with guns, and they're going to take over and hold the U.S. Capitol, never to be dislodged. I mean, the whole thing's a joke if you think that an actual insurrection was going to take place that night.
Yeah, this is not the way we envision an insurrection happening. Of course, the way everybody envisions it is everybody, has an AR-15 or something, slung around their back, and, they march fully armed. I don't know if there was anybody actually. Was there any reports of anybody who was actually armed with a gun? I know there was some conflicting reports that somebody had zip ties, and there was some, I don't know if it's even true, but there was talks about bomb threats at the Republican and Democratic National headquarters. But did anybody actually have a gun? Do we know if that has been proven?
I do not believe so. And the thing is if someone was really walking around there locked and loaded, we would have been hearing about that for the last 2 weeks.
I know, that's the astonishing thing. I mean, can you believe that nobody was caught with a gun out of all these thousands of people that are supposed to be, Second Amendment, people who are heavily for the Second Amendment and Republicans? None of them actually brought a gun. Yeah, and we're supposed to believe that this was a coordinated, QAnon, insurrection. It just, it doesn't pass the sniff test.
It really does not at all. And so the fact that they're running with it so much, especially after riots and occupation of police stations were happening for weeks on end last summer, yet they're going to pretend that 2-3 hours in D.C. of a protest that could be said to be mostly peaceful is something that needs to have 20,000 National Guardsmen now deployed in the Capitol. It's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about what we actually think might happen. So we both don't think the impeachment is going to go through the Senate, correct? So if you guys don't know, the impeachment did go through the House. 10 Republicans did vote for it, so it has to go to the Senate. Mitch McConnell has said that there's no rush to get to it. The earliest the Senate could vote would be, I believe, a day before Biden's inauguration. And so that means that the likely thing to happen if they go through with the impeachment proceedings is that Trump will already be out of office, and these impeachment proceedings will, sort of be more ceremonial. In my opinion, that's not going to actually happen. The thing that I do see as perhaps more likely is the fact that Trump could possibly be barred from holding office again. Now, from what I have read is that this only requires a vote in the Senate, and they only need a simple majority to actually bar Trump from holding office again. Supposedly there is some precedent for this, not obviously for a president, but
that's bizarre.
There is some precedent for some federal judges, I believe, but this happened over 100 years ago. So there is precedent for this, for barring people from holding federal office, but just not the president. And like I said, it would have to be just a majority vote, which actually works in favor of Democrats right now because it's a 50-50 split. And if it's a 50-50 split, then Vice President Kamala Harris will have the tie-breaking vote if they do vote on this. Now, the problem with this, though, is that it's a bit unclear if this is even legal because, nothing like this has ever been done before. So there's certainly, there's some uncertainty about if the Senate does vote to bar him from public office, if it will hold, because certainly Trump would probably legally try to challenge that banning if it does happen. But I do see that as the most likely consequence to happen from this. The impeachment, I don't think will happen. The 25th Amendment strategy, Mike Pence said, he's one of the key people in that strategy. Pence would have to go along with it. He said that it would set a dangerous precedent, so that's pretty much been taken off the table. So I think all we have left, in my opinion, is this obscure possibility of barring Trump from office through a vote in the Senate. Any thoughts on that?
I think that maybe it is even possible for the impeachment to happen. It would literally require, of course, a lot of Republican defectors, but who knows? We're really in uncharted territory because no one can really measure exactly how spineless the Republicans are until Trump is out of office. We haven't been able to get this kind of litmus test before. I will agree with you that it is unlikely, but you really never know. You never know with these cowards, as far as them just doing a simple majority vote to permanently ban Trump from ever holding office again. I think something like that would potentially pass, and you probably would find pretty much every Democrat voting for it. And I think that you could even find one or two Republicans that would defect, because, you have guys like Mitt Romney in the world that they will hit their own party if it helps them secure their own position in their own state, which is, of course, a very sad commentary. But I do imagine there could be some legal challenges as to whether or not this could be binding to a president, especially when he has not done any sort of crime that would really merit this. He didn't incite any riot. I don't know the circumstances of what happened with the judges who faced this kind of barring from federal office, but I imagine that it was more serious than just being very much disliked.
From my understanding, they both were barred. It wasn't just, the precedent was that they actually were barred. It wasn't just legal proceedings and they voted no. It was that two of them were actually barred from holding judge positions in the future. But yeah, this was, I think one of them was like 1905, and the other one was like in the 1870s or something like this. This was
And
a long time ago.
I bet they committed an actual crime as well, like.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to what you said there, of course Romney might defect, but as I said, nobody from the Republican Party even needs to defect, because it will be a 50-50 split now, and with Kamala Harris as vice president being tie-breaking vote in the Senate, because the vice president, in case of tie-breaking votes and stuff, the vice president does have that role, and of course vote to break that tie and ban Trump, I think, from holding office. Now, one of the things that also leads me to believe this, and I saw a very interesting quote, and this apparently was from a Republican strategist talking to the Associated Press. This was on Wednesday, and it said McConnell believes that Trump committed impeachable offenses and considers the Democrats' impeachment drive an opportunity to reduce the divisive, chaotic president's hold on the GOP. So apparently McConnell has had enough of Trump. That's what the insiders are saying. And also, I believe his wife is Elaine Chao. Correct me if I'm wrong, but she was like the transportation secretary under Trump, and she quickly quit after this Capitol Hill protest. And a lot of people are saying that, McConnell has had enough, and he's going to try to do something to sort of purge the last vestiges of Trump from the Republican Party in order to preserve any bit of integrity or whatnot. I thought that was a very interesting quote, and that's another reason why it leads me to believe that the most likely thing to happen is Trump is barred from any other public office in the future.
And then we will not be voting for the Republicans again for a while unless we really know that we're voting for a Trump-esque person. At least that's how I feel. And I think that's how many people on Parler and Gab feel as well. So I guess those would be my closing thoughts on it. Do you have anything else to add, Brandon?
Yeah, I would just like to add that, yeah, I agree. We've talked before about how the Republican Party has definitely evolved under Trump, and it has sort of, I think, enlarged its tent a bit. We saw that Trump did court African American and Hispanic voters a record numbers in the last election. Trump actually had the most votes out of any incumbent president in history too. I think it was like almost 10 million more votes than he had 4 years ago. So there still is a lot of support for Trump-esque type presidents, and those Trump supporters are not going away. So it would be very wise for the Republican Party to court them in the future. Perhaps you want to purge Trump from the Republican Party, but you're not going to be able to purge his ideas that people have latched onto and they have showed support for. So they're going to have to add those or keep them in the Republican Party platform. Well, with that being said, I think we can close for this episode. Thank you if you have listened to the end. We will see you guys next time on the Paleoconnection.